morning light slipped into the small music room, painting soft lines across the wooden floor. The piano stood in the center like a quiet friend waiting for someone to speak to it. Students slowly filtered in, chatting among themselves, laughing, getting ready for another ordinary class. Among them walked a student who always kept to the side, always holding books close to the chest, moving quietly as if hoping no one would notice. This student never made noise, never tried to join any group, and never drew attention. But the teacher often noticed the way the student sat. Back straight, eyes lowered, hands usually folded on the desk. It wasn't the kind of shyness people made fun of. It was the kind that made others look twice and wonder what stories were hidden behind such silence. The teacher had seen many students over the years. Some came in excited, some nervous, some with natural talent, and some without any musical background at all. But this particular student carried something different. A kind of quiet tension, as if the heart wanted to speak but the voice didn't know how. The teacher didn't push, didn't force participation, didn't single anyone out. Instead, the teacher always tried to create an easy atmosphere where everyone felt safe to try. This morning, the class started like any other. The teacher tapped the piano keys lightly, warming up the room with a simple melody. A few students sat up straighter, some whispered to each other. A few just watched the teacher's hands move with calm familiarity. Even if someone didn't know music, the sound made them relax. When the warm-up ended, the teacher smiled and looked at the group. "Who wants to try a simple tune today?" the teacher asked, as casually as if asking who wanted a glass of water. Usually, one or two eager students raised their hands immediately. Today, as expected, a few hands shot up, waving around for attention. But the teacher didn't choose them right away. Instead, the teacher said gently, "Anyone who hasn't played before? Someone who just wants to try something easy?" The room grew a little quieter. A couple of hands slowly lowered. A few students glanced around to see who might volunteer. And then something happened that almost no one expected. A hand lifted, slow, steady, almost uncertain. The quiet student who rarely spoke, rarely moved, rarely made eye contact was raising a hand. It wasn't high. It wasn't confident. It was just a small motion, as if the student wasn't sure whether it was allowed. A few students looked over, surprised. One whispered softly, "I didn't know they even wanted to play." Another student nudged a friend, eyebrows raised. The teacher's smile softened even more. "Would you like to try?" the teacher asked, voice warm as sunlight. The student nodded once, barely visible but still clear enough. The teacher gestured toward the piano. "Come, just a simple tune. Whatever you're comfortable with." The student slowly stood up. The room felt suddenly larger, quieter, more focused. Even the students who usually got distracted stopped what they were doing. Everyone watched, but not in a mean or judgmental way. It was the kind of curious silence that happens when something unexpected begins. The student walked toward the piano, footsteps light, almost soundless. One hand briefly touched the side of the instrument, the way someone might touch the edge of a doorway before entering a new place. The teacher stepped aside, giving space. The student sat down on the bench, adjusting the posture a little. The fingers hovered above the keys, unsure at first. The student's eyes stayed on the piano, not on the classmates, not on the teacher. "Take your time," the teacher said gently. The student breathed in slowly. The fingers touched the keys again, lightly, as if testing the piano's warmth. A simple note came out, then another. The kind of basic, easy notes beginners often start with. Something a young learner could pick up in a short time. The teacher nodded encouragingly. The class listened politely. Everything seemed ordinary, quiet, simple. But the teacher noticed something. It was small, almost hidden, but still there. The way the students' fingers rested on the keys. Not stiff, not clumsy. They fell naturally, almost too naturally, like hands that already knew what they were doing. The student played the simple tune again. But this time, the fingers didn't stop where the teacher had expected. The student's shoulders loosened slightly, as if something inside was waking up. The notes began to connect in a smoother way, forming a flow that didn't match what a beginner should know. The teacher watched more closely now, eyes narrowing with interest instead of confusion. This was unusual. Very unusual. Then something subtle but important happened. The student closed their eyes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't planned. It was as natural as breathing. The student's hands began moving faster, not wildly, not carelessly, but with a strange confidence that painted a completely different picture. The class leaned forward. The tune was no longer simple. It grew richer, deeper. The students' fingers glided across the keys with a smoothness that didn't match their shy nature. It felt like two different personalities. The quiet face everyone knew, and the fearless hands that moved like they belonged to someone else. The teacher didn't interrupt. The teacher didn't even breathe loudly. Something was happening, something rare, and the teacher didn't want to break it. The student kept going, playing notes that no beginner would know. Each sound filled the room with a warmth and energy that didn't exist a minute before. Even students who usually lost interest in anything serious were now staring wide-eyed. Someone whispered softly, "This isn't a simple tune." Another whispered, "How are they doing that?" The teacher knew exactly what they were witnessing. This wasn't luck. This wasn't guessing. This was skill. Real skill. And yet the student didn't look proud or excited. Their expression remained soft, almost unsure, like they weren't even aware of what was happening. Their hands were doing the talking, telling a story only they understood. When the student finally opened their eyes again, the music slowly faded until the last note hung in the air like a breath that didn't want to leave. The room stayed silent for a moment, as if no one dared interrupt the delicate echo of what just happened. The student's hands gently slid off the keys. The student looked down, shoulders slightly drawn, as if expecting someone to say they did something wrong. The teacher stepped forward, still speechless for a breath. No one else moved. Every eye in the room stayed locked on the student sitting at the piano. What was meant to be a simple, small moment in class had turned into something far more surprising. And though the student didn't know it yet, this quiet moment, this tiny decision to raise a hand, was about to change everything. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds after the student finished playing, as if everyone's mind needed a moment to understand what they had just heard. Even the air felt different, heavier with surprise. The students slowly lifted their hands from the keys and placed them on their lap, almost ashamed of what they had done. Even though there was nothing to be ashamed of. The silence wasn't judgment, it was shock. The teacher finally let out a soft breath, almost a laugh of disbelief, though not in a mocking way. It was the kind of small laugh someone makes when something unexpected and wonderful happens. The teacher stepped a little closer, careful not to startle the student, who still kept their heads slightly down. "You said you wanted to play a simple tune," the teacher said in a gentle voice, trying not to overwhelm them. "That wasn't simple at all." A few students whispered among themselves, still processing what they had seen. Some looked at each other with wide eyes, others leaned forward, waiting for what the student or teacher would say next. Even the students who usually weren't interested in music were paying attention now. The student didn't respond immediately. Instead, they kept staring at the piano keys, like they couldn't believe their own hands had played those notes. Their fingers still twitched slightly, as if they were remembering the rhythm. It wasn't confidence, it was something else. Something hidden for a long time and now exposed in front of everyone. The teacher didn't push. Instead, the teacher asked softly, "Would you like to try another one? Maybe something shorter?" The students' shoulders tensed slightly. They shook their head, almost too quickly. The performance had taken something out of them. Courage, strength, or maybe it had stirred emotions they weren't ready to face in front of others. "That's completely fine," the teacher said immediately, sensing the discomfort. "You did really well." The student finally looked up, eyes cautious but searching for any sign of mockery. They found none, only genuine awe on the teacher's face. The teacher turned to the rest of the class. "Let's give a little applause," the teacher said. The room erupted, not loudly, not wildly, but in a warm, amazed way. The kind of applause people give when they're impressed and touched at the same time. Some students smiled, some looked confused, and some looked inspired. The shy student who rarely spoke had just created a moment none of them would forget. The student stood up slowly from the piano bench, giving a small nod of appreciation. It was clear they weren't used to attention, not even the positive kind. They walked back to their seat, head lowered, hands tucked close to the body, as though hoping to shrink back into invisibility. During the rest of the class, the teacher tried to continue normally, showing new exercises and explaining basic rhythms. But every few minutes, the teacher's eyes drifted to the student sitting quietly, looking down at the notebook but not writing anything. The teacher wasn't judging, they were thinking. There was something there, something rare. The lesson moved on, but the atmosphere stayed different. Students kept glancing toward the shy classmate, whispering things like, "I didn't know they could do that," and "Why didn't they ever say anything?" It wasn't cruel whispering, just confused curiosity. The student felt the attention even if no one spoke directly. It made them uncomfortable but also strangely relieved. For the first time, people weren't ignoring them, they were noticing something good. When the class ended, everyone gathered their things to leave. The student waited for the crowd to clear, as usual, preferring to avoid being caught in the middle of the rush. But this time, a couple of students lingered nearby, pretending to rearrange their bags while stealing glances. One finally approached with a small smile. "Hey, that was amazing," the student said quietly. The shy student's eyes widened a bit, surprised by the compliment. They nodded slightly but didn't say anything. Another student added, "Yeah, seriously, how do you even know how to play like that?" The shy student looked down at their hands, unsure how to answer. Before they had to respond, the teacher stepped in. "All of you head out now," the teacher said kindly, not wanting the student to feel cornered. "We'll talk more next time." The other students nodded and left the room, though they continued whispering in the hallway. Once the room emptied, the teacher approached the students slowly, giving them space. "You surprised everyone today," the teacher said softly. "Even me." The students stayed quiet. "You don't have to explain anything," the teacher added. "But if you ever want to talk about your music, I'm here." The student nodded again just once. The teacher smiled. "You have a talent, a real one. Don't be afraid of it." Those words made the student look up for a moment. In their eyes, there was a mix of fear and hope, like someone standing at the edge of a new path, but unsure if they should take the first step. The student finally whispered, "I didn't mean to play so much." The teacher shook their head gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. Music comes out in its own way sometimes." The student looked at the piano again. There was a softness in their expression, a kind of longing mixed with nervousness. "I just wanted to try," they whispered. "And you did more than try," the teacher replied. "You shared something beautiful." The student didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments felt heavy on their shoulders, almost unfamiliar. But the teacher's tone wasn't heavy. It was warm, the kind of warm that didn't overwhelm but gave comfort. Slowly, the student put their notebook into their bag, preparing to leave. The teacher didn't stop them. "See you next class," the teacher said softly. The student paused at the door. For a moment, they looked back at the piano. Just a glance. But it was enough for the teacher to understand that something inside the student had shifted. When the student stepped outside, the hallway was quieter. A few students gave curious looks but didn't approach. The student walked out of the building into the open air, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. Something big had happened, bigger than anyone realized. On the way home, the student replayed the performance in their mind. Every note, every movement, every moment of silence before and after felt unreal. They had never played in front of anyone before. Not once. Not even family. Music had always been something they kept private, like a secret friend who listened without asking questions. At home, they played quietly on an old keyboard, making sure no one else could hear. It wasn't because they were ashamed of the music. It was because they feared the world would misunderstand it. But today, the world had heard it. The reaction wasn't harsh. It wasn't cruel. It was full of wonder. That thought stayed with them all the way home. Maybe, For the first time, the student wondered if music wasn't just a private escape. Maybe it could be something bigger, something that could connect them to others instead of hiding them. As the student reached the front door of their home, they paused for a long moment, feeling the weight of the day settle into their chest. Part of them wanted to hide again, to pretend nothing had happened. But another part, a small, growing part, felt strangely excited, because something had changed. A simple request to play a basic tune had opened a door the student never thought they could walk through. And now, whether they were ready or not, that door wasn't going to close anymore. What waited on the other side, they didn't know yet. But the world had heard their music. And life, from this moment on, would not be the same. The next class came faster than the student expected. All week, the memory of that day stayed with them like a quiet echo. The moment their fingers touched the piano, the sound of applause, the teacher's warm expression. Every detail replayed again and again. Each time it felt unbelievable. They hadn't planned to do anything special that day. They only wanted to play a simple tune. But something inside had opened, and once it did, the music flowed out without asking permission. Now, standing at the door of the music room, the student hesitated before entering. There were voices inside, familiar and lively. Some students were laughing, some warming up their instruments, others flipping through their notebooks. The shy student felt their stomach tighten, unsure how everyone would react. When they finally stepped in, a few heads turned immediately. Whispered words moved across the room like a light breeze. That's them. They're the one who played last time. I wonder if they'll play again today. The student pretended not to hear, keeping their eyes low as they quietly made their way to their usual seat. But they could feel the weight of attention. Not the harsh kind, but attention still. It made their chest feel warm and heavy at the same time. The teacher entered a moment later, greeting everyone with the same friendly energy as always. But when the teacher's eyes met the students', there was a small, knowing smile. Not a smile that pressured, but one that welcomed. Good to see everyone back, the teacher announced. We have some new exercises to work on today. But before we start, I want to say something. The room grew quieter. What happened last class? The teacher continued. Reminded me of why I love teaching. Sometimes, talent appears in the most unexpected ways. And when it does, we should appreciate it. A few students glanced toward the shy student again. The student felt their cheeks warm. The teacher clapped once to brighten the mood. All right, let's begin. The class went through warm-ups, tapping rhythms on tables, humming simple scales, practicing basic finger patterns. The shy student did everything quietly but correctly. Their hands moved with natural ease, even when doing the most basic drills. The teacher noticed. Every so often, the teacher paused behind the student, watching their technique. Not with suspicion, but with fascination. Most beginners held their hands stiffly or pressed the keys too hard. This student, however, had fluid movements, the kind that usually took months or even years to develop. When it was time for students to take turns practicing at the piano, the teacher didn't force anyone. Instead, the teacher simply said, if anyone wants to try something, today the piano is open. A couple students volunteered first, playing short melodies with varying levels of skill. Some stumbled, some did well, some giggled when they hit wrong keys. The room felt comfortable, supportive. Then the teacher glanced at the shy student. Would you like to play today? The teacher asked softly. There was no pressure in the voice, no expectation, just an invitation. The student hesitated. Their hands tightened around the edge of the desk. Last time, the music had come out on its own, like a quiet storm hidden inside their chest. They didn't know if it would happen again, but something in the teacher's tone felt safe. Slowly, the student stood up. A soft murmur ran through the room. Not mocking, just surprised. The student walked to the piano again, but this time the path felt different. Last time, they had walked in fear and uncertainty. Today, there was still fear, but also a strange sense of belonging. They sat on the bench, took a slow breath, and placed their hands on the keys. The teacher spoke quietly. Play anything you like. The student pressed a single note, then another. The same simple notes as last time. The class watched silently. And then it happened again. The simple notes slowly transformed. The students' shoulders relaxed. Their breathing changed. Their fingers moved more freely, finding patterns and melodies that were far beyond basic lessons. This time, the student didn't close their eyes immediately. Instead, they looked at the keys with a soft focus, as if reading something invisible. Then their eyes drifted shut, not from fear but from feeling. Music filled the room again, but it was different now. Last time, the melody had been emotional and powerful. This time, it was soft, flowing, like gentle water moving over smooth stones. Each note felt like a whisper, each chord like a small confession. The students listened without moving. Some leaned forward, some held their breath, some looked at one another with expressions that said, "How is this even possible?" The teacher stood still, hands folded, eyes slightly misted from admiration. The teacher had seen talented students before, but not like this, never so quietly, never so unexpectedly. The melody continued, growing slightly stronger, then softening again. It felt like the student was speaking through sound instead of words. Maybe things they had never said out loud were being shared here, in this moment, through the piano. Finally, the music slowed. The student lifted their fingers one last time, letting the last note linger in the air. Silence. Then the applause came, gentle, but filled with wonder. The student opened their eyes slowly. For a moment, they looked lost, as if waking from a dream. They looked around at the faces watching them, expecting confusion or disbelief. But what they saw was admiration. One student whispered loudly enough for the room to hear, "That was beautiful." Another said, "How do you even know how to do that?" The shy student didn't answer. Their throat felt tight, but not in a painful way, more like emotion they couldn't express. The teacher stepped forward. "Everyone, take a short break," the teacher said. "I want to speak to our pianist for a moment." Students nodded, still glancing back at the student as they stretched or grabbed water bottles. The teacher sat gently beside the student on the bench. "You know," the teacher said softly, "you're doing something remarkable." The student lowered their eyes. "I didn't mean to. It just happened." "That's the thing," the teacher replied, smiling. "Real talent often shows up like that. Unplanned, honest, pure." The student swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. After a moment, the teacher asked, "Where did you learn to play like this?" The student hesitated. "At home," they said quietly, "on an old keyboard." "No lessons?" the teacher asked gently. The student shook their head. "No, I just tried things. I listened to music online. I practiced at night when everyone was asleep." The teacher felt a warmth rise in their chest. "That makes this even more extraordinary." The student's hands trembled slightly on their lap. "I didn't think it mattered." "It does," the teacher said with steady confidence. "Your music matters." The student looked up slowly. Their eyes were filled with uncertainty, but also something else. Something small and glowing. "Hope." The teacher continued, "You have a gift, and gifts like this shouldn't be hidden. If you're willing, I'd like to help you grow. We can work together. You can learn advanced techniques, new styles, real training." The student's breath caught. The idea felt overwhelming. Someone wanted to help. Someone saw value in what they could do. "Do you think I can really learn?" the student asked. The teacher smiled softly. "You already have. What you're doing now. Many trained players struggle to reach that level." The student didn't know what to say. Their heart felt like it was beating too fast. The teacher added, "You don't need to decide today. Just know I believe in you." Those words echoed in the student's mind like music itself. Believe in you. After the break, class resumed, but the mood was gentle and bright. Students practiced new rhythms, but every so often their attention drifted toward the shy student. Not with judgment, this time with respect. When class ended, a few students approached again. "You were amazing. That literally gave me chills. You should perform someday." Each compliment made the student blush, retreating a little, but they didn't run away. Something inside felt different now, Less fear, more curiosity. As the student left the room, their steps felt lighter than usual. The hallway didn't feel as intimidating today. The world didn't feel as silent. On the way home, they thought about the music they played, the voices of classmates, the teacher's belief. A small thought formed in their mind, fragile but growing. Maybe music wasn't something meant to be hidden. Maybe it was meant to be shared. And for the first time, the student felt a quiet excitement about what might happen next. The days following the second performance felt different for the student. Something inside them had shifted, though they couldn't fully explain what it was. It felt like a small door had opened, and through it came a gentle breeze of possibility. They had spent years believing their music was just a private world for late nights and quiet moments, something no one else needed to hear. But now, for the first time, there were people who wanted to listen. At home, things were still simple. Their old keyboard sat in the corner of their small room, its keys a little faded, a few of them clicking louder than the rest. It wasn't fancy, but it had been with the student through many lonely nights, through moments of stress and quiet thought. That keyboard was like a friend, one that had never asked for anything. That evening, the student sat down in front of it, uncertain. Usually, music came easily, like a breath. But tonight, their hands hovered over the keys without pressing down. Their mind was full of thoughts. Overthinking, perhaps. The teacher's voice, the surprise in the class, the compliments afterward. It was a lot for someone who wasn't used to attention. Finally, after a long pause, they pressed a single key. Then another. A soft melody formed, hesitant at first, like testing the ground before walking. Slowly it grew stronger, more certain, as if the music sensed that it was finally allowed to be heard. As the melody filled the room, the student didn't think about the class or the teacher. They only felt the music itself, the familiar comfort of the keys beneath their fingers. The melody grew deeper, faster in some moments, quieter in others. It reflected what they felt. Hope, fear, confusion, excitement, all at once. When they stopped, the room felt too quiet again. But this time, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt like a pause before something important. The next music class arrived with a restless energy. Students talked more than usual, and some kept glancing toward the door as if waiting for something special to happen. The shy student entered as quietly as ever, but the moment they walked in, several faces softened with recognition. "Hey!" one student said gently. "Hi!" another whispered. The shy student gave a tiny nod, unsure how to respond but grateful that no one was being pushy. The teacher entered soon after, carrying a folder and a small smile that suggested they had been thinking about something. And they had. "Before we start today's lesson," the teacher said, "I want to talk about music in a different way." The class fell silent. Music isn't only notes or technique. It's expression. It's emotion. It's communication. The teacher glanced toward the shy student before continuing. Sometimes we don't need words to tell others who we are. Sometimes, music speaks for us. The shy student felt their cheeks warm. They lowered their eyes, hoping no one would stare too hard. "Today," the teacher said, "I want us to talk about what music means to each of you." And yes, the teacher added with a calm tone, "If anyone wants to share through sound instead of words, the piano is right here." A few students chuckled softly but kindly. For many, the idea of playing in front of others was terrifying. But others looked curious, even inspired. One student raised a hand and said music helped them calm down when they were stressed. Another said music reminded them of places they had lived before. There were funny stories too. Someone had once broken a keyboard by sitting on it, causing the class to laugh. The shy student listened quietly, surprised by how open everyone was. It made the room feel warmer. Then the teacher turned toward them. "You don't have to," the teacher said softly. "But if you'd like to play something again today, the class would love to hear it." The shy student froze for a moment. Their heart beat faster, and their hands felt cold. They didn't want to disappoint anyone. What if the music didn't come out the same way? What if they made mistakes? What if last time had just been luck? But then, something important happened. A student from across the room said gently, "No pressure. We just like hearing you play." Another added, "Yeah, it's peaceful, peaceful." That word settled softly in the student's chest. No one was demanding anything. No one was expecting a miracle. They simply wanted to listen. Slowly, the student stood up. The room fell silent again, but it was a warm silence, not a heavy one. The student walked to the piano, their steps steady but careful. They sat, took a breath, and placed their hands on the keys. The teacher stepped back, giving space. The first notes came out softer than before, almost shy. But as the student breathed in, their hands relaxed. The melody began to unfold like a slow sunrise, gentle, warm, steady. This time, the music was different from the last two performances. It wasn't dramatic or sad. It wasn't bold or sharp. Instead, it felt like a conversation. A soft one. A conversation the student was finally having with the world. The melody was simple at first, but as it continued, it grew more layered. It felt like the student was telling the class something they had never been able to put into words. How hard it had been to stay unnoticed, how comforting music had always been, how much they wished they could find a place where they belonged. Some students closed their eyes, letting the music fill their minds. Others watched the students' hands, amazed at how naturally they moved. The teacher listened closely, feeling that familiar sense of wonder rise again. This wasn't just talent. This was emotion turned into art. When the final note faded, the class did something unexpected. They didn't clap right away. Instead, they sat in silence, absorbing the feeling. It wasn't awkward, it was meaningful. Then, slowly, the applause began. Gentle, respectful, real. The shy student opened their eyes and looked around. For the first time, they didn't look away. Their expression wasn't fearful. It was unsure. Yes, but there was also a small spark of pride. The teacher approached and spoke softly so only the student could hear. "You don't realize how special this is, do you?" The student looked down. "I just played what I felt." "That," the teacher said, "is what makes it special." Class resumed, but the room felt different. Students talked quietly, sharing thoughts about the performance. Some whispered about how relaxing the music was. A few said they wanted to practice harder. When class ended and the students began to leave, one of them approached the shy student at the door. "You helped me today," the student said. "Your music made me think about things I've been worried about. So, thank you." The shy student blinked, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know." "That's the thing," the student said with a small smile. "Sometimes you help people without knowing." The shy student walked out into the hallway with a strange feeling inside. A warm one. They had never imagined their music could do something like that. As they walked home, they thought about everything that had happened. The fears they once had didn't feel as heavy now. The teacher believed in them. The class appreciated them. And for the first time, the music inside them didn't feel like a secret they needed to hide. That night, when they sat in front of their old keyboard, their hands didn't hesitate. They played with confidence, not loud or proud, but sure. And as the melody filled their room, they felt something new growing in their heart. Courage. The kind of courage that was gentle and steady, like the beginning of a long journey. They didn't know where the journey would lead, but they were finally ready to follow the music wherever it wanted to go. The days that followed felt different for the quiet student, even if they didn't fully understand why. Something inside them had shifted, like a small door opening after being locked for years. The memory of standing at the piano, letting their fingers move the way they always wished they could, still felt unreal. They had expected people to stare or judge, but instead they witnessed something else: respect, warmth, and a kind of encouragement they had never felt from a room full of people before. It stayed with them, almost like a soft light following them wherever they walked. The teacher carried the moment in their mind too. They kept replaying the performance, trying to understand how someone so quiet could hold that much expression inside. The teacher had taught for years, seen many students come and go, but something about this moment stayed with them. It wasn't just the skill, it was the sincerity behind every note. There was no showing off, no attempt to impress. It was simply someone pouring out the music they had kept hidden for too long. And that truth alone made the teacher certain about one thing: the student wasn't just talented. They were extraordinary. During the next class, the teacher entered the room earlier than usual, arranging a few papers and adjusting the piano bench. They glanced toward the door every few seconds, waiting for the student to arrive. When the student finally stepped inside, still quiet and careful with each movement, the teacher offered a small smile. It was a simple gesture, but it carried meaning. The student returned a hesitant nod, unsure whether to sit in their usual seat or take another place. They chose the back as always. The other learners greeted each other, chatting about their week, sharing small jokes or stories. But every now and then, one of them threw a glance toward the shy student. Not out of judgment, something close to admiration. Word had spread through the class. The amazing performance wasn't just a quick moment anymore. It had become a topic people whispered about, the kind of story that grew each time someone repeated it. The student felt their cheeks warm whenever someone looked their way, unsure of how to act with the new attention. When class began, the teacher didn't start with exercises or scales. Instead, they held a paper in their hand and cleared their throat softly. "We're going to try something different today," the teacher announced. "But before that, I want to talk about something important." The room quieted instantly. The student lowered their head slightly, sensing the attention drifting toward them. "I want everyone to understand something," the teacher continued. "Talent can come from anywhere, and sometimes people don't realize how special they are until a single moment gives them the courage to step forward." Some of the learners nodded, unsure where the teacher was going with this, but sensing the weight behind the words. The teacher's eyes rested on the shy student. "And I want to say, your performance was one of the most heartfelt things I've witnessed in a long time." The student's heart thumped harder, and their hands curled on their lap. They wanted to disappear, yet they also felt something warm rising inside, a mix of pride and disbelief. A few classmates clapped softly, offering gentle smiles. The student looked down, trying to accept the kindness without feeling overwhelmed. After a moment, the teacher continued, "I don't want to pressure you, but I'd like to talk about your future in music. Not here in front of everyone, but after class, if that's all right." The student nodded quietly. That small gesture seemed enough to ease the teacher's curiosity. Class went on, but the student struggled to focus. Their mind kept wandering toward the end of the lesson. What would the teacher say? Were they expecting too much? Would they ask the student to perform again in front of people? The thought alone made their stomach tighten. When the lesson finally finished, the room emptied slowly. A few classmates waved goodbye before leaving. The students stood near the doorway, clutching their bag, unsure whether to leave or stay. The teacher approached gently. "Do you have a moment?" they asked. The student nodded again. They sat near the piano, facing each other. The teacher took a deep breath, choosing their words carefully. "You've taught yourself, haven't you?" The student looked down. "Yes." "How long have you been playing?" "A few years. Mostly at home." The teacher tilted their head slightly. "And no lessons, right?" "No. What you did the other day, that takes more than practice. Takes heart. Takes instinct. Not everyone has that." The student didn't know how to respond. They had never thought of their playing as special. It was just something they did because it felt calming, almost like breathing. The teacher continued, "I want you to join the advanced group. You don't have to if you're not ready, but I honestly believe you belong there." The student felt a rush of emotion. Fear, excitement, confusion, and hope all tangled together. "I'm not good with people," the student whispered. "You don't have to be," the teacher answered gently. "You just have to be good with the piano. And that you already are." Silence filled the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt more like a moment of understanding between two people who cared deeply about the same thing. Then the teacher added, "There's one more thing. I want to offer you a scholarship. The Music Center has a program for students who show real promise. And you do." The student's eyes widened. "A scholarship?" "Yes. You wouldn't have to worry about fees for the advanced course. Everything would be covered." The students stared at their hands, overwhelmed. No one had ever offered them something like this before. They had always believed they would remain unnoticed, quietly learning on their own. Now someone was telling them they had a future in something they loved. Think about it, the teacher said. You don't have to decide right now. Just know that the chance is here for you. The student nodded slowly. Thank you. Those two words carried a depth the teacher understood. In the days that followed, the student walked through life with a quiet spark inside. They practiced at home not because they felt pressured, but because the music felt different now. It felt like a door had opened, and for the first time, they weren't afraid to step through. They began imagining what it might be like to sit in an advanced class, surrounded by people who shared the same passion. It scared them, but it also filled them with a gentle excitement they had never felt before. A feeling that whispered maybe they did belong there. Eventually, the student returned to the teacher and gave a small nod that held a big decision. I'll join, they said. The teacher smiled. Good. You're ready. And just like that, a new chapter began. One that the student never thought they would have the courage to start. But sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected moment, one encouraging voice, and one brave step forward. And now, with a quiet heart full of hope, the student was ready to see where the music would take them next.